He leaned against the bar, half drunk and overconfident, laughing too loudly at his own jokes. The crowd around him was thinning, the night growing quieter, and that's when he saw her, alone, calm, sipping her drink with a quiet grace that didn't match the chaos of the place. Her posture was relaxed but firm, her eyes scanning the room without fear or interest. Something about her made him smirk. "Hey, sweetheart," he slurred, walking over, "what's a quiet girl like you doing in a place like this?" She didn't answer right away. Just a small, polite smile, like she'd heard that same line 100 times before. "Just having a drink," she said softly. Her voice was steady, almost melodic, but it carried a weight that made him pause. He decided to push further. "You military or something? You've got that soldier vibe." She looked up at him then, her calm eyes meeting his. "Retired," she replied simply. "Oh yeah," he laughed, thinking he'd found his opening. "So what was your call sign, Miss Retired?" "Barbie, Angel." His buddies laughed behind him, egging him on. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, very slowly, she set her glass down, turned fully to face him, and said two words that changed everything. "Viper 1. The noise in the bar seemed to vanish. The man's grin froze, his drink halfway to his mouth. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "Wait, Viper 1, as in, yes," she interrupted quietly. "As in 160th SAW. Black Hawks, Afghanistan." The name hit him like a punch. Everyone who'd ever been in or near the military knew that call sign. Viper 1 wasn't just any pilot. She was the one who flew through enemy fire to pull soldiers out when no one else would go. The legend who had defied orders to save an entire unit pinned under heavy fire. The woman whose chopper had come back with holes big enough to fit a fist through, and still landed safely. The bully's smirk disappeared completely. He stammered, the color draining from his face. You're that Viper 1. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The quiet confidence in her gaze said everything. "You flew that rescue in Kunar Valley," he whispered, his voice shaking slightly. "My cousin, he was there. He said if it weren't for Viper 1, none of them would have made it out." She gave a small nod and picked her drink back up. "I'm glad they made it," she said simply. "That's what matters." The man stepped back, his drink forgotten, guilt flashing in his eyes. His friends stood silent now, their earlier laughter gone, replaced by a heavy, respectful quiet. The bartender, who'd been polishing glasses nearby, nodded once toward her, a look of recognition and admiration in his eyes. She didn't want the attention. She never did. She'd come home from the war years ago, trading rotor blades and sandstorms for quiet nights and the sound of her own heartbeat. But nights like this always reminded her how invisible people could be, until someone tried to make them small. The bully mumbled an apology, but she only gave him a faint smile. "It's fine," she said. "Just remember, never judge someone by the volume of their voice." He nodded quickly and backed away, the lesson burning into his mind. When he sat back down with his friends, he didn't speak for a long time. The bar slowly filled with low murmurs again, the clinking of glasses, the shuffle of feet. Viper 1 finished her drink, left a few bills on the counter, and stood. As she walked past the table where the men sat, the bully looked up, his eyes full of regret. "Thank you," he said quietly. She stopped just long enough to give him a firm nod. "You're welcome," she replied, and then she was gone. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around her like an old friend. She looked up at the stars, the same stars she used to see from her cockpit thousands of feet above the earth. Her past was filled with fire and steel, but tonight was just peace. Inside the bar, the story of Viper 1 spread from table to table, whispered like a legend come to life. The man who had mocked her now sat in silence, realizing how fragile pride could be when faced with true strength. She never needed to raise her voice, never needed to prove herself. Her calm, quiet presence said everything, the kind of strength that doesn't roar, but when it speaks, the whole room listens. That night, every person in that bar walked away remembering one thing: real power doesn't come from being loud, arrogant, or seen. It comes from the courage to act, the heart to lead, and the humility to never need recognition. And somewhere down the road, a young woman walked under the quiet stars, still, Viper 1, not because of the name painted on her helicopter, but because of the fire still burning quietly within her. Next morning, the bar was still buzzing with the story. You know, she was the Viper 1. Someone whispered over coffee and hangovers. Nobody knew her name, where she came from, or why she'd walked into that small town bar. But everyone remembered the silence that fell when she spoke those two words. The man who'd mocked her, Eddie, hadn't slept much. He kept replaying her calm, steady gaze, her voice that carried both warmth and weight. For the first time in years, he'd felt truly small, not because she humiliated him, but because she didn't even need to. She had carried a kind of dignity he couldn't fake, something earned through pain and courage he could never imagine. He sat on his porch, staring at the sunrise, thinking about the cousin she had saved, the cousin he hadn't spoken to in years. Guilt pressed down on him. He'd wasted so much time drinking, bragging, pretending to be someone he wasn't. And here was this woman, who had risked everything for people like him, people who didn't even deserve it. Across town, Sarah, Viper 1, Harlow parked her old Jeep near a lake. She loved the early hours, when the mist hung low and the world hadn't yet remembered its noise. She sipped her coffee, her hands steady despite the faint scars that traced across her skin, marks left from her last mission, reminders of lives saved and friends lost. She closed her eyes and heard the blades again, the sound of the Black Hawk slicing through the desert wind. Sometimes the memories came like whispers, other times, like storms. But today, they came softly. She had spent years trying to blend in, to be just another face, another story. But peace wasn't easy for warriors. The silence that others sought could feel too loud when you'd lived through chaos. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Hey, this is Eddie. I was the guy from the bar last night. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, for what I said, and for not understanding. You saved my cousin's life. He told me about you once, but I didn't believe him. If you ever need help with anything at all, I owe you one. She stared at the message for a long time before typing back two words. You're forgiven. She smiled slightly, knowing forgiveness was more for her than for him. It was her way of letting go. That evening, Eddie visited his cousin, Mark, a quiet man who walked with a limp but carried himself with pride. You'll never believe who I met, Eddie said as they sat on the porch. Viper 1. Mark froze. You met Sarah? Eddie nodded. Didn't know her name. Just met her by accident at the bar. She didn't talk much. Mark chuckled softly. She never did. But when she did, people listened. She saved you, didn't she? Eddie asked. Mark's eyes softened. She saved all of us. That mission wasn't supposed to happen. We were trapped, surrounded. Command said extraction was impossible. But she came anyway. She said, if they're breathing, I'm flying. He looked at the horizon, his voice quiet. We heard her chopper before we saw it. Enemy fire everywhere. I thought she wouldn't make it. But somehow, she did. She got us out. Lost her co-pilot that day. Eddie felt a lump in his throat. She never said a word about any of that. She wouldn't, Mark said. She doesn't carry her medals. She carries her ghosts. That night, as the two men sat in silence, Eddie realized something that would stay with him forever. Heroes don't need recognition. They need peace. A week later, Sarah went back to that same bar, this time earlier, before the crowd. The bartender smiled as she sat down. You caused quite the stir last week, he said. Haven't seen this place that quiet in years. Didn't mean to, she replied. I just came for a drink. He nodded. People need reminders sometimes. You gave them one. She smiled faintly. Reminders of what? That strength isn't loud, he said. And respect isn't demanded, it's earned. For a moment, She looked down at her drink, the reflection of the dim lights flickering across the glass. "I guess we all forget that sometimes," she said softly. Then she stood up, left some cash on the counter, and walked toward the door. "Hey, Viper," the bartender called. "You flying again?" She turned slightly, a small smile touching her lips. "Always," she said. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, and she looked up at the sky, her sky. Somewhere deep inside, the roar of rotor blades echoed not as a burden but as a heartbeat. The war was behind her, but her spirit never stopped flying. And as she disappeared into the night, those who'd met her would never forget that quiet woman at the bar, because sometimes the softest voices carry the strongest stories, and sometimes the calmest souls have survived the fiercest storms. 2 weeks passed, and life in the small town went back to its quiet rhythm, but something had changed. People spoke softer, treated strangers with more respect, and every time someone new came into the bar, the story of Viper 1 made its way into conversation again. To most, it was just a powerful tale about courage and humility. But for Eddie, it became something deeper, a turning point. He'd stopped drinking after that night. The laughter that once came from arrogance was replaced by silence and thought. Every morning, he'd wake up early and help his neighbor fix fences or mow lawns, small acts that gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. But deep down, he couldn't shake the image of that woman sitting calmly at the bar, eyes steady, voice unshaken. She had faced things that would break most men, and yet she carried herself with peace. He wanted to understand how. One morning, Eddie decided to visit the local Veterans Center. He didn't know why, only that something was pulling him there. Inside, he found a small group of people drinking coffee, playing chess, sharing stories in low voices. A woman was helping unpack food donations, and when she turned around, Eddie froze. It was her. Sarah looked up, surprised but calm. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said with a faint smile. "I didn't expect to be here," Eddie admitted. "Thought maybe I could help out. Do something that mattered for once." Her eyes softened. "That's something that always matters," she said. "It's not about what you were, it's about what you do now." For a moment, he didn't know what to say. "You know," he began quietly, "I used to think strength was about being louder than everyone else. But after that night, I realized I didn't even understand the word." Sarah placed a box down gently and looked at him. "Strength isn't noise. It's control. It's choosing peace when anger's easier. It's standing back up when no one's watching." Her words hit deeper than he expected. He nodded slowly. "Did you ever get tired of it? Carrying it all?" She smiled sadly. "Every day. But then I remember the faces of the ones who made it home. That's what keeps me steady." They worked together that day, sorting donations and listening to the stories of veterans who had seen the same darkness in different forms. For the first time in years, Eddie felt connected to something real, something good. As the sun began to set, he walked out with Sarah toward the parking lot. "You ever miss flying?" he asked. She looked at the orange glow of the horizon and smiled. "Sometimes," she said, "but I've learned something. Life doesn't always need wings. Sometimes you just need a reason to keep walking." He looked at her, realizing that she wasn't just a soldier or a pilot, she was a survivor who'd found peace in the silence after the storm. The next week, Eddie started volunteering regularly at the center. He talked less and listened more. He helped build a small memorial garden outside, a place where veterans could sit, remember, and heal. And every so often, Sarah would stop by, offering quiet advice or simply sitting beside him in peaceful silence. One day, as they worked on planting new flowers, Eddie asked, "Why, Viper 1? Why that call sign?" Sarah chuckled softly. "Because I was fast, stubborn, and didn't scare easy. My commander said once I locked on, I never missed my target." Eddie grinned. "Sounds about right." She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "You know, people think Viper means dangerous. But to me, it meant precision. Calm under pressure. Strike only when needed. He nodded, understanding more than he did before. You still live by that, don't you? Every day, she said simply. By the time the garden was finished, the small town had found new respect for the quiet veterans who walked among them. And when people asked about the woman who had inspired it all, Eddie would just say, "You'll know her if you meet her. She doesn't talk much, but when she does, you'll listen." On the last evening of summer, Sarah stood by the garden, her hands folded, watching the wind ripple across the flowers. A small plaque rested beneath a tree, dedicated to those who came home with silent battles, and the strength to keep living. Eddie stood beside her. "You did this," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, we did. I just reminded people that silence doesn't mean weakness, it means discipline." As the sun dipped below the horizon, a soft breeze swept through the leaves. For a moment, Eddie thought he could hear the faint echo of rotor blades, fading into the distance like a farewell salute. Sarah smiled at the sound, peaceful and proud. "Once a pilot, always a pilot," she whispered. And as the first stars appeared above them, the town lights flickering to life below, it was clear that Viper 1 hadn't just flown missions, she taught people to rise, to respect, and to find strength in stillness. Because true heroes don't need the world to remember the names, only the lessons they leave behind.